Our first story deals with a subculture of heavy metal music that some feel is sending a dangerous message to your kids.
The forces of evil on the dark side of devil rock.
And I want to talk tonight about the devil and demons and witches and wizards.
And we just mix it up with hardcore and aggression and come out with something we think is an original sound.
Loud, fast, heavy, you know.
Well, what do you got?
What do you got?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Riff Worship Podcast. Joined with you as always is Sugar Grove's own world heavyweight champion, Austin Paulson. How are you doing, bud?
Heavy. I'm doing great. We have a very special episode today. I'm very stoked to get into this.
You know what? I am too. I had the privilege a handful of weeks ago to dig into a great new release from a band called Atræ Bilis. And Aumicide is fantastic. It's out through $20 spin. And we are joined today with David from Atræ Bilis. David, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good. Thank you so much. We caught your review too on YouTube, so I appreciate you doing the deep dive there on that. It sounded like, what we're all about really connected with you, which really makes us feel like, our voice is being heard. So we do appreciate the effort that you put into that to let us know. And thanks for extending the invitation to have a chat.
Oh, no worries, man. Thank you for checking out the review.
Yeah, absolutely.
The question is, it's out. It's been out for a while. Has the weight been lifted? How are you feeling about the response from it? How do you feel overall about it?
It's good. It's a strange feeling. I think leading up to the release, everybody in the band's super anxious. You just want to get it out. There's so many ideas in there that you kind of want to be the first to let everybody know that they're your ideas and they're out. And then as soon as it's released, it's kind of like, well, it's out. What's the next thing that we have to do? So our main priority right now is playing and promoting it through live shows. I guess how we feel has shifted from the release to just making sure that we're playing the material as well as we can to as many people as we can. And I'm already aching to start writing new stuff because with that stress being lifted, I now feel clear and just ready to go again. I think writing's our favorite part of this whole thing that we're doing. So, it's great to connect with people. It's great to release stuff, but just being mindful in the unfolding of new ideas and new material it's as fresh as it gets, because it just feels like doors are being opened and you don't really know which corridor you're going down. So that exploratory side of music is always the funnest, but the response has been really positive, which is great. It's also been pretty mixed. So that's quite interesting, seeing how it dichotomizes the audience. And that's everything from the artwork right down to the guitar effects, which are very prominent and very strong. They weren't, it was intentional to make sure that they were abrasive sounding and not subtle and in the background, letting people to guess. So in that sense, it's been interesting to observe what people like and what people don't like and how opinionated some people are.
In heavy metal, in death metal, anything like that, opinionated people, no fucking way. Not going to happen.
Yeah.
I did like getting into, some of the research and, discovering some of your writing process and, maybe even before that, just knowing how meticulous like everything sounded, and then come to find you're like just demoing and working together in the practice space. And it definitely comes through on the record. But, I guess with some of those riffs, there's riffs all over this album for sure. What to you as like a musician or as a listener, what does a riff need? Like, what do you look for in a riff in particular?
So I've thought about this before, and I don't necessarily think that it needs to fit any objective criteria, anything that you can really scale, but subjectively it needs to have a vibe.
Yeah.
It can't, whether it's a simple groove or whether it's just a battering ram of notes, there needs to be a personality behind it. And that's not to say that I necessarily place the riffs that I like to incorporate in with our music as particularly favorable on that scale, but listening to music and feeling music when I'm playing it is more about atmosphere, vibe, personality, color than anything else. And I'm not sure what ages you guys are, but I'm 37 now, and I've been listening to death metal for longer than I haven't been listening to death metal. And I think over that time, I've just become very sensitive to people trying to write riffs as opposed to just exuding their personality with whatever instrument they have. And so I'm pretty conscious of that, both as a listener and a writer. I would hope that, yeah, I think integrity is a big part of it as well. If it's it's a lot of people quantizing things and it's missing out on a bit of groove, but I think at the core it's going to be a personality, and that ranges from a lot of my favorite records. Sounds of the Animal Kingdom from Brutal Truth might have like a super lo-fi production value, but the riffs on that, like you listen to Gemini's Cricket and it's just like, this is so cool. Like this person is so cool. I like to hear a person in a riff, personality in a riff. I think, I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but that's kind of where I feel it's important.
No, it's interesting to hear your take on that, and I certainly hear a lot of personality in this record. There's, maybe on the surface level, it may seem like there's a lot going on, right? There's a lot of different twists and turns, but it doesn't feel like forced. It's not just like, here's a riff, here's a riff, here's a riff. It feels like you paid a lot of attention into groove and how things should flow. And there's like a lot of like really neat, like stylistic choices, like the guitar harmonics and like all of these crazy things. And so, I really just have to commend you for like, it feels like you really took your time and it wasn't like trying to force like a circle into a square peg or anything like that. It really all flows very nicely.
Thank you. I guess if we're kind of looking at it from that angle too, I do try to consider how I'm going to feel about these riffs in several years from now. Particularly if I do have the opportunity to tour these songs extensively. If we ever get to a period where we are heavily touring, I don't ever want to get sick of playing a song. And so there is a little bit of a balance between making sure that I need to have my chops up so that it's kind of keeping me dialed in while still grooving and having fun with everything. I think if it was all just strictly beat down stuff, I'd be relying on an audience to give back to me to enjoy what's going on, as opposed to me just not actually really caring about what everybody else is thinking or possibly considering. And I can just kind of be in my own world and just close my eyes and just play my guitar and just have fun. So that's a big part of it as well. And I think it's interesting that a lot of people consider this tech death or technical death, because to me, it's like, it's more about the riff functionality. Like there's a lot of riffs that are really quite long, but the main purpose of that is I'm hoping that those longer riffs have got their own little story and narrative. But they keep me interested. It piques my attention. So I guess it is a little bit selfish in that sense, but that's also what I like to listen to as well from a lot of bands that I look up to. So
that's like the big thing, isn't it? We all write music, we all create things we want to hear, things maybe we aren't hearing, things that we're really into. And if some people end up liking it, that's just kind of the icing on the cake, right? Because it is a very selfish thing. You want to play stuff that you like. You want to play stuff you're interested in. You want to play stuff that you can feel kind of at a guttural feeling about. What you stated about riffs feeling feeling, right? Having a feeling to them, having a vibe to them. I think we've all sat down with like, we put on a metronome or something or whatever, or we put on, some sort of like drum track and go, okay, I'm just going to write right now. And sometimes you can come up with great stuff, and sometimes it just feels contrived. It feels forced. And you go, okay, there's aspects of that I really like. Let's keep those aspects, but let's come back maybe when I'm a little bit more refreshed. And I'm sure you're the same way. I mean, I'll be working my 9 to 5 and it's like, shit, I'm in the middle of an important meeting. I got to step out and like hum something into my phone or anything like that. It's all about a feel, and it's remarkable where the inspiration can pop up, and to be inspired and create different things that would also draw people in while also knowing that you're going to write the things you want to hear is just fantastic. It's no feeling is comparative to that.
No, there's not. And it's a positive feeling because with the amount of music that we have access to, you'd think that we've cracked every combination of the code with what's possible, but it's impossible. And I think that's a really exciting thing to remember, that just because things have been done a certain way before doesn't mean that that's actually a rule book that should be a reference point for a lot of things. So when it comes to creating music that you want to hear, there's usually a scratch an itch that needs to be scratched, and being able to create that scratcher per se is it is a nice feeling. But it's also an interesting feeling because once you've scratched that itch, gone, right, it's there forever. You can listen to it, so it's on to the next one. So it's I'm very grateful that I'm able to play with the group of guys that I play with that can facilitate that, because I couldn't imagine how frustrating it is to have so many ideas swimming around in your head and feeling like there's a ceiling above you just because of maybe technical limitations or equipment limitations. I mean, equipment limitations and budgetary limitations are very realistic for most bands. I think it's just one of those things that you just kind of have to do the best with what you've got and experiment a little bit. But on the technical side of things, I'm very grateful that everything kind of fell into place with these guys, because it feels like most ideas that we come up with as individuals or as a unit is almost telekinetic. We don't even really verbalize a lot of things, so it's really awesome. Yeah,
and it seems like whether playing just in the jam space with like Luca or working parts out. I mean, speaking of members, I mean, everybody seems to have like a moment to shine on this record. I mean, you even have a new bass player, correct? Miles Morrison is new. What was that process like? I'm curious. Was it? I believe you maybe put out an advertisement when you got Jordan into the band, but how did you find Miles? How did you bring him into the fold? And how was that process in writing?
Yeah. So if memory serves me correctly, I mean, it was a couple of years ago now. But I believe Luca, the drummer in the band, for anybody listening that doesn't understand, Luca's the drummer, Jordan is our singer, and Miles is our bass player. But Luca, I believe, was just chatting with a mutual friend that also listens to metal. And Vancouver is like a very condensed space because of the water and the mountains. So we all live in apartment complexes here, so it's not uncommon to bump into people that from different scenes and things, realizing that they live in the same building and have been for a long time. So I believe Luca was in a lobby or something and was speaking with a guitar player, either from one of Miles's current bands or one of his previous bands, and it just mentioned in passing, through conversations, how your band's doing, how your band's doing, kind of thing. That we were looking for a bass player, and this guitar player had mentioned Miles, and I hadn't met Miles before. Luca hadn't met Miles before, but I believe Luca gave Miles just a quick little Facebook, Instagram stalk, and just checked out his band shirts and gave him the pre-screening to make sure that he wasn't listening to, things that may have suggested that he'd only been listening to this stuff for a few years, potentially. He's like, yeah, I think we should reach out to this guy. And so we did. And the first time I met Miles, there was Arcspire were they had a listening party for one of their records at a local bar down here. So I went down. I wasn't planning on going, but it was a good opportunity. And I'm not sure if I knew the Arcspire guys at that time, but there was a little crew there. So I went down there, we had a beer, and he seemed like a really cool cat. So we just sent him some tabs and he came through and just rocked, you know. He playing the stuff is no challenge at all. So it was just a matter of making sure that there weren't too many personality clashes. And on that front, he's awesome. So that's how Miles came into the fold.
He's like he went to school for music, correct? If I'm not mistaken.
He did. Yeah, he did music performance. So his family is actually quite musical as well. As is Luca's family. Luca's dad actually is, again, if memory serves me right, my memory is not the greatest, but I think he was writing orchestrations for classical music and film at one point. So the chants that you hear on a lot of the Atræ Bilis songs are actually Luca. He's got a really dialed in ear for that, and he's got the baritone voice. So yeah, it kind of seems like everybody's pretty musical except for Jordan and myself, actually, in that sense. Yeah. But yeah, he's great. And Miles also plays guitar. So, where Luca and I are usually using the vibey terms to describe ideas, Miles is able to transcribe those into the technical terms for those needing it. Yeah.
One thing for sure that certainly stands out about this record is the way it sounds. Like the production of this is incredible. Definitely have to shout out Christian Donaldson. If I, again, did my research correctly, it seemed like he had more of like he came into the previous record kind of quickly. Maybe his input was rather limited based on the time constraints, but now knowing that you were going to work with him, what sorts of things did you learn from this process? Was there anything that you were surprised about? I love the sound of the last record, but this is definitely like an elevated, like a step in just a whole new direction, I thought.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And thanks for listening to everything that you have previous to this. Christian's the man. We're really lucky that things worked out they did with Apex AP, and he did really save us on that record. And we knew that if we gave him more freedom, more opportunity, more time to be able to not just mix and master, but produce with us and record and set the mics and do all the editing and everything, that it would just be a step up, an exponentially bigger step up. And we just really, really love the guy. He's just such a nice guy. So yeah, it was a no-brainer. As far as what I learned, I don't mean to get soppy here. It's not really too technical, because I mean, it gets to a point where he's just hearing things that my ears just simply don't have the fidelity to really understand. I mean, the microtonal soundscapes that he is in tune with, he's just on another planet, comparatively to me, who I feel like a Neanderthal standing next to him. But he just cares so much about his job, and he's always pushing himself so much, and he has so much patience for the artists that he works with, that it was not only incredibly endearing, but it's kind of weird meeting one of your heroes and you kind of leave after meeting them and like them even more than you had. And spending a month with him, I mean, you spend a lot of time with a person in a month. You really do see all sides. And the things that man cares about outside of his professional career really stand up. He's just such a good guy. So it's I kind of get sidetracked when I think about Christian as a producer, because it's just kind of like we trust you with the sonic side of things, and then when it comes to, I guess, the storytelling of the songs and textures and additional flavors and colorings, it's a little more collaborative. I've usually got a lot of ideas in my head that I'm willing to, I'm asking to try. And in that sense, I think we worked really well. But things I learned, it technically, most of my takeaways it was probably the boot camp that I got in just actually playing my instrument, because he's so focused on tempos, which wasn't something that I had experienced so much before, which is testament to just how professional he is. But finding the pocket, especially at some of these speeds, was front row center. It was right there. That's what we wanted to find. It was the pocket. No take was good enough until it was in the pocket. And so rhythmically, I definitely felt like he was noting me in a good, positive way, just to get the tighter takes from me, and it brought more of an awareness of that aspect of our music to me, which I appreciate. So I do feel that ever since tracking with Christian, that my playing has substantially improved. And usually it's tours. Usually it's, when you're out for a few weeks, you're playing every night, you get really, really, really tight. And that still happens. But I think that the largest, I guess, spike in my playing, the biggest gap, the more ground that I covered as far as being a technically proficient rhythm-based player, certainly came from the Aumicide sessions.
I like that, especially the boot camp and talking about some of these speeds. I apologize because I've never recorded before personally, but hearing about the punch-ins on a loop and like listening to the record, I'm like, my hands started to cramp up, just like, oh God, like, yeah. Is your right hand all right? Are you doing okay?
Oh, it's fine. I mean, usually, you just build up such an endurance. It was a little bit interesting because when we did the drums, Luca was playing along to guide guitars that I had put together just for the demos. So I didn't actually do much playing. I was just kind of sitting back in the control room with Christian, and it was good in that sense because I wasn't preoccupied with playing along, and I could really just focus the sound at large and metabolize what the songs needed or didn't need. So that was great. But then after that process with the drums had finished, I realized I hadn't played guitar in weeks at that point. Right. So it was like, oh shit, now I'm on the chopping block and now I need to play as tight as everybody else has. So it took, probably a couple of days for me to really feel broken in to the level that I wanted to be at. But after that, after a couple of 8-10 hour long days, these strange endurance muscles that start building up on these strange parts of your arms that you never knew existed just start to form, and your fingertips get really, really, really callous. And it gets to a point where playing guitar is actually, the more you play, the easier it becomes. So you get faster, you get more articulate, and I don't know if other players are the same, but feeling limitless with just locking in to clicks and drums and playing in drop A tuning with a heavy, crunchy tone is, to me, it's kind of like being behind the wheel of like a Ferrari or something without a speed limit. It's really freeing. It really just feels like you can just So it doesn't hurt. It's moreish.
One thing we're big fans of as well is just the kind of thematic nature of this, for sure. I mean,
Absolutely.
Dylan and I have loved, I know he mentioned it in his review, the sculpture alone is so awesome. You know, like obviously being fans of this style of music and getting the record out and being able to look at it and be like, what the fuck is this? It's so cool. Do you have that actually, right? Correct? In your home?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I could probably pull it out if you want to give me.
You don't have to
10
go
seconds.
through. All right. Well,
Sure.
10 seconds.
Yeah. All right. Let me pull it out. This will be a feature first, actually.
That's right. I thank you for doing that. I'm so curious to see how big this thing actually is.
All right.
This is wild.
It's actually, I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's still on the tray that that was in the Inward to Abraxas video. But everybody that was crying out that this was
so
AI,
cool. Look at that.
Oh,
I can
That's
assure
beautiful.
you that it's
look at that
it's
thing.
not. So yeah, I mean, this is probably the worst imaginable way to really see just the incredible work of Grey House Studios. But you can see all the tape and things that weren't totally visible before we started roughing this up in the videos and stuff. And I'm not sure if you can see in the back, but there's actually like prosthetic ribs and things to kind of give it its structure. And yeah, it's pretty cool. So it's
I'm sure all like a Rick Baker thing. He probably didn't envision all of his work being in the light for everyone to see. But thank you for showing us that. It's kind of crazy to see in person.
So did I catch that right? People were thinking it was AI?
Yeah, I think some people, when the first single first came out and you could just see the artwork, my intuition is that people wanted it to be AI because of how difficult it can be to look at, especially if you've got sensitivities with some of the nature that it evokes. Maybe a lot of people don't like the record cover, even knowing that it's a sculpture for the same reasons. It might just pull on some nerves that some people are a little weary of. I'm not sure, but you've also got to remember that when this artwork was released, this was right when Deicide had released their artwork.
That's right.
And I think it was Pestilence had released their artwork, and it was everybody's doing AI, and all the video clips were coming out as all AI. So we were just dropped right in the middle of that. And I think it's easier because, I mean, how many sculptures have you seen with these levels of detail on a death metal record? I mean, I haven't seen one that I'm aware of.
Not that I can think of.
Off the top of my head, it would be like Carcass Heartwork, but that's just a photo of a piece of art.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was, I think some of the ideas, or at least when I proposed the ideas to the guys, was so many punk and hardcore records will take a photo of animal experimentation or a nuked planet or kids in these just destitute garbage gravelands, and it's like, these photos are very powerful because they're true, and it's capturing again a vibe. And I was like, why don't bands with death metal try and capture a photo of everything, that the worlds that they're creating? It's almost like, and this is, every band's got their own ideas and stories and aesthetics and things. But to me, like, if I'm listening to a heavy record, like, I want it to look heavy. I don't necessarily want to remove myself from these ideas by saying, oh, it's okay, it's just a painting, so I've been insulated. I'll keep that for power metal, and I'll keep that for thrash and things, because it is cheesy inherently, right?
It's been done. Yeah.
And there are some amazing artists, and we've definitely worked with amazing artists too. But for Apex Sapien, we originally wanted a sculpture as well, but at that stage, we unfortunately had not linked up with Grey House Studios, and some of the feedback that we got, some of the responses, some of the quotes that we got were just insulting, especially for what we're asking, which was so much simpler than what the Aumicide concept was asking for. So it worked out cheaper for us to work with Eliran Kantor, and Eliran was amazing. But the idea was that every album that we do would be a sculpture and a photo.
That's great.
Yeah. So hopefully the next album that we do, we can continue with that. But it is a shame that we couldn't have that theme for all albums. Everything happens for a reason, but it would have been really nice to have maintained that from, I don't want to say day dot, but for every full length album that we had done. So who knows? Maybe down in the future there will be a re-release with a reimagining of Apex Sapien potentially. Who knows? But
speaking on the sculpture side of it, just initial reaction when I saw the artwork was I had two things that came to mind. It was the Kingdom of Tyrants video that Cattle Decapitation did, and Austin, I don't know if you've seen it, but Shudder has the Mad God stop motion film.
Yeah, of course.
And I immediately went there. It's like, okay, like,
yeah,
I loved Apex Sapien. I saw the artwork. It's like, all right, I bring it on. Like, come on. How bleak are we getting? What route are we going? And I was pleasantly surprised with that. But with all that in mind, David, if you're a big film fan, horror film fan in particular, Austin is a big film fan. So with being such a fan of horror and writing the style of music that you write and that you're into, type of influences are you drawing from film? What any directors, any movies in particular that may have went into the writing of this record that you had in mind?
It's mostly books, but there have definitely been films that bite-sized ideas. Films typically go for an hour and a half, 2 hours, that I like to indulge in. Those that come to mind immediately, possibly Enter the Void, which I love. All of our records are about rebirth. This liminal space between one body and the next, and usually the next body is the horrifying part of the story. A lot of body horror, so probably David Cronenberg.
Sure. Yeah.
Spiritually, probably The Holy Mountain as well.
I saw that you have a kind of a separate page, and I'm very curious to know about this. Fulci Rots. Is it like a screen printing type of thing, or like what exactly is the mission behind this?
Thanks. Yeah, I just started that.
Looks so cool.
A couple of weeks ago. Thank you. I've got a lot of designs, but it originally came from we did a US tour last year, and I came back from that tour, and then we recorded the album, and then I came back home, and there was just this big dead space. And I was like, what am I going to do creatively? Like, I'm bored. Like, I need to do something.
Yeah.
I need to create something. So I just started, I just downloaded some software and watched some YouTube tutorials and just tried to educate myself on just like very, very basic graphic design. Like, I'm talking just chop it, slam it together, add some color, and just play with some tools and filters, and just have fun. And most of the time this was being done, it was just something that I would do while I had another movie on in the background, a comfort film that I'd seen 1,000 times. I wouldn't be missing out on something, and that in turn would be influencing what I'd be working on. So with that in mind, that's kind of how I just started this little thing that I do in spare time. And then, as you can probably see, I love movies. I love expressing movies that I love and talking about movies. But there's a lot of movies that just have not got designs or shirts or posters for that I just, again, self-indulgently want to decor my apartment and torso with. So it's one of those things, like, if you want something, you just have to do it yourself sometimes. So there's quite a few films that I love, a lot of exploitation movies from back home, a lot of books as well. I haven't seen too many boots of like prominent books that I really enjoy. So I just made this little space called Fulci Rots, and anybody here that's listening, Fulci is an Italian director, Fulci, and there is this term, Fulci lives. He died some years ago, and his legacy lives on. But I felt like the irony in that is that he did a lot of spaghetti westerns, he did a lot of actioners, he did a lot of things, but he's most renowned for his zombie films. The Beyond, City of the Living Dead, Zombie, aka Zombie Flesh Eaters. And so the irony for me is that the horror community that heralds Fulci and has this Fulci lives. It's like, well, he lived and now he's rotting in the ground like one of his zombies. So he's fucking Fulci rots, mate, you know? So that's where the term came from.
There it is.
So I've got a few designs up at the moment. The idea is to launch pre-orders. I've got the website ready to go once we've got at least a few hundred followers, because I don't want to launch pre-orders and have zero reach with anything. And just screen print designs of films and books and other counterculture related designs for people that like to collect physical shirts, posters, and things of, and just use that as a way for me to connect with that community as well.
It looks like you certainly are into a lot of like physical media. I mean, even just on that page, I'm assuming you have a pretty extensive VHS collection as well. I saw Extra, which is a fucking insane movie. If anybody hasn't seen that movie, it's probably available in full on YouTube, but maybe one of the most horrific birthing scenes I've ever seen in a movie. Holy shit.
Oh yeah, that movie's got it all. Apparently that director does not. He's quite embarrassed by that film, which I don't understand why, because to me, I mean, speaking of riffs and individuality and personality, that movie, it's got stink lines coming out of the TV of just like how much personality there is coming off that screen. So, and it's a great father-son story as well. I mean, as far as physical media, I mean, I don't have a massive collection. I did have a pretty substantial collection when I was living in Australia, but that's all with my friend Jordan. I hope maybe he's got rid of it. I don't know, Jordan, if you're listening, I hope you're enjoying all those movies, buddy. And then once I moved to Canada, I wasn't really sure how long I'd be living here, but I mean, it's just a matter of time until I just find things that I just miss and want to watch again. And over time, I've amassed a humble collection of things that I like, and I'm of course still enjoying hunting down the VHS and the nostalgia of it all. It kind of takes me back to my childhood, and I found that maybe it's a habitual thing, but whenever I watch movies on streaming platforms, I'm more inclined to look at my phone, whereas VHS, I think it just kind of it puts me back into that childhood mentality of how I used to watch movies without a smartphone or too many distractions, and I'm usually more engrossed, regardless of how grainy the picture and stuff is. But
kind of jumping off of that, maybe can we circle back if we may? You're obviously from Australia, Melbourne as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was growing up like, especially maybe even finding extreme music? How did you get into this style? Like, maybe was there a record in particular, maybe a first record? It could be maybe even heavy or non. What were you getting into in your youth?
Yeah, so I think I've always had like a pretty active mind that always latched on to melodies and earworms and stuff. Even as a kid, I remember I only really made this association maybe a year or so ago when I recalled just watching a family video, and I was just in the backyard and I was just looping this melody. I remember it's la dee dee da dee da la dee dee da dee da, and it was just over, and it was just stuck in my head. And I don't know where that came from, but I think that was probably a pretty strong indicator that my brain was always going to be creating some kind of series of musical notes together. So I wasn't too much into pop music or anything. My first instrument was actually trumpet as a kid. And I was, again, speaking of movies and stuff, I loved the Star Wars original trilogy when I was very young. And this guy came into my primary school and played the Star Wars theme on trumpet. And I said, I want to be able to do that. So once I learned the Star Wars theme, it was on to cooler instruments.
That dude knew what he was doing.
He did. Yeah. He picked the right songs for sure. And then I fell into bass guitar, just I guess out of there needing to be a bass player from very young circles of friends that would prefer to play music to playing sport outside. I was never much of a sports guy. So I learned bass originally. And then as I was learning bass, I'd be linking up with other kids my age. And I think it was probably around 12 or 13. I started high school a year earlier. So I was, first year of high school was when the family got a computer with dial-up internet. And I also started jamming with guys, hanging out with guys that also liked heavy music. So it went from things like Pennywise and, a bit of like that, that punk that I wasn't necessarily listening to, but, the older brother of my younger brother's friends were listening to. So it was just around, it was just kind of omnipresent. I listened to that. I knew like the heavy guitars and stuff, but it was really when things like Pantera, Metallica entered the picture that my ears pricked up a little more. It wasn't a crazy amount, but having the internet, I was exposed to. There used to be this chat software called ICQ. I don't know if that was something you were familiar with. It was kind of like MSN Messenger, but you could also share files. And so these kids that would be going to these local shows were able to send songs to each other of local bands. And Melbourne at that time when I was growing up, there were incredible bands that I still listened to. So there was Damage, there was a band called The Wolves, who unfortunately never released an album, but should have. The demos are online on YouTube, and everybody should go check out The Wolves. Bands like Bowel Mouth, Bremelin. There were just new doors that were being opened. And then concurrently, I was able to, I had a little bit of pocket money. So I go down to a place called Metal Mayhem in the city, and I just look at all these album covers and I'd see Immortal for the first time, and I'd see Cannibal Corpse for the first time, and I was just really curious. When I heard these bands, I remember a very, very, very pivotal point to me was I had seen the Chile Gutted artwork from Disgorge.
Oh, okay.
California Disgorge. And I was like, I really want to hear this. And so I went online and I tried to download some Disgorge songs, and I got Cali Disgorge, but I also got Mexican Disgorge. In particular, it was a Chronic Corpora Infest record. And I didn't know what was going on. It was like this barrage of noise and these vocals that were just like, what is going on? But I wanted to know, like I wanted to figure out what exactly was going on. It challenged me, but like in an interesting way, the same way that a math problem did almost. And so I kept listening to them. And I'd just be burning these CDs at that point with just these mashups of just everything that was similar to those bands. and I'd have a little Discman, and I just imbibe as much as I could. My brain was like a sponge. And then I got to a point where I'd be jamming with other people, and they'd be listening to bands like Megadeth and Slayer, and I'm like, ugh, I want something a little more interesting. And so that's when they'd be flipping me the Deicide records and stuff, and I'd be like, yeah, this was kind of more up my alley. So in a strange way, I kind of circled back to those more legacy kind of thrash metal bands a little bit later. But I definitely went down the wormhole of, at that time, it was American Brutal Death, which I guess was the first wave of technical death metal in some ways, before Necrophagist came and went up the fretboard. You know, before that, it was all down here. And you know, as I grew up and all this stuff was going on, I was smoking a lot more pot, and I was just, my favorite thing to do in the world was just listen to music high, and still is. You know, funny things don't change. But I got to have some really interesting conversations where my mind was open and understand how other people understand different styles of music, like hardcore, for example. You know, you can definitely hear the language in hardcore songs where it's setting things up for the audience, which is absolutely not the showcase approach of death metal. So that was really cool. And in tandem with all that, playing with new people, it was around the same time that I also learned how to record at home, just do demos. And demoing was a huge part of growing up, and just writing and creating and cutting my teeth on what works and doesn't work with transitions and tempo changes and all those things. I was doing that forever. Yeah, it was kind of just what my circle did. You know, we just record demos and ideas and get stoned and just mash it all up. So yeah, but I think I was definitely in the brutal death wormhole by a very, very young age, and it simply started because it was too much. I didn't really get it.
You know, it's funny, and I don't think I've ever talked to Austin about this too, but you mentioned the trumpet, you mentioned the bass guitar, and you mentioned kind of listening to things that are off-putting at first, and you go, you know what? I got to see more. I got to figure out why I'm not getting this. I started out with trumpet in middle school band.
Oh, wow.
Started out with trumpet. The band leader at the time said there will be no stringed instruments in there. Picked up a bass guitar because a couple buddies were like, we need a bassist. And I went, sure, why not? Stuck with that for many, many years. Picked up guitar much later, and I wanted to become the guitar player I wasn't necessarily hearing. The guitar player I wanted someone else to be. I figured, you know, why the hell not? I'll become that musician. I'll become that guitar player. But I distinctly remember seeing and hearing Hammer Smash Face for the first time, and going, this makes completely no sense, was put off by it, and went, yeah, this is shit. I'm never touching this. And I'd go, you know what? Let's hear it one more time. Let's just do it. And then that proceeded for, you know, the next many months of, well, I like how this sounds. Let's find a little bit more here, a little bit more there. You mentioned the mismatched kind of like compilated CDs you were making. I would go like, well, if Cannibal Corpse sounds like this, you know, what does Suffocation sound like? What does Deicide sound like? Let's just throw this all in there. And, you know, between that and like, I'm a couple years younger than you, and seeing the rise of like the second wave of Headbangers Ball and all that was around the same period of time. And it's funny. It's funny to hear that there are people at different areas of the globe, like having these same thoughts and be able to like dig into things without having someone show them to you, right? Of just going, huh, you know, it's like the first time you see a really traumatic movie or a violent movie. I can distinctly remember watching Goodfellas for the first time. And the opening scene, they open the trunk and, you know, the knife and everything. I was 11 years old, and like that scene still comes back to me. I go, I shouldn't be watching this, but I have to watch it more. I got to find more stuff like this. and then you end up watching a Serbian film on YouTube because some monster streamed it. But yeah, that's very similar to how I kind of dove into extreme music.
Well, I'll just add to that. It does feel like a full circle for me, almost like it was predicated insofar that on top of those first two initial Disgorge songs that I heard, the other third song that I heard, and this was from a guy that I used to play music with called Daniel Buchholz, and he was the drummer with the double kick pedal, which was a big deal when you really start jamming at such a young age. He was listening to a lot of stuff, but he invited me over to his place after school one day, and he's like, dude, I've heard this band. You've got to come check this out after school. And I was like, okay, cool. And I went over, and it was Crown of Thorns from Cryptopsy.
Oh.
And it starts off with that Exorcist 3 sample.
Oh, yeah.
And I knew the movie, and I was like, this is cool. And then the hyperblasting comes in, Lord Worm, and it was just this. It felt like a train off tracks coming straight toward me, and I wanted impact. And it's very cool that all these years later, recording with Christian, he was also like, "Oh, I got to show you something." And what he showed me was the original tapes of None So Vile.
Good Lord.
Yeah. And it was what was even cooler about that was he did a remix of that record for an online production school called URM Academy, and he isolated all of the tracks. So he preserved the tape, he isolated all the tracks, and one night after just recording, a section of the Aumicide record, we just had some puts in, and I think we had a beer or two, and he was like, "Oh, I'll show you the individual tracks." And I can't tell you how magical it was to hear the individual tracks of None So Vile, because there were only 8 tracks on it. And so to hear what the recording engineer at the time had committed to, how many drums were put together on the one microphone and things like that, hear the acoustics of the room that they were in and isolating Lord Worm's vocals, and just hearing how, I don't think he was sober in those sessions. I'm pretty sure I heard in one of his podcast interviews that he drank a bottle of red wine and did the entire album in like one take. And to just hear the state of him without the music was just like, this is unreal. So yeah, it's kind of, sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack. But yeah, awesome. I think it's
absolutely.
Younger me and older me kind of converging around a very seminal record as well.
That's great. I am curious because you mentioned, having this kind of background of, recording things with your friends, making demos, and even just hearing your passion for like some of the production of records or your own record. Is that something that transitioned when you found your career? You're an acoustical consultant? Is that correct? I found that really fascinating. I don't know. Maybe you can tell me exactly what it is that means.
Yeah. Sure. So acoustics is the science of sound, basically. Can also be the science of noise, which is kind of where I work. And I'm a consultant, and usually there's consultation services. The major sectors is industry noise, and then there's environmental noise, and there's architectural noise. And of course, there's a lot more. There's underwater acoustics, there's psychoacoustics, there's a lot of different branches of acoustics. There's acoustic warfare, for crying out loud. But I work in architectural acoustics primarily, and that is, put most simply, it's noise and vibration control for buildings. So I work with a lot of architects, interior designers, developers, boards, districts, etc., to make sure that not only do individual spaces function as they're intended to, but I help control noise from things like emissions from the premises to protect, other noise sensitive receptors. So, quite a few schools, quite a few hospitals, commercial buildings, offices, airports, residences. They've all got their own unique set of noise and vibration control requirements. So if we're looking at just like one room per se, there's a lot of different things to consider. The first is the levels of sound isolation from the other adjoining spaces. So you got to make sure that the walls and the floors and everything are adequately constructed to make sure that they're insulating people. And then the geometry of the space also plays a huge part in whether or not there's going to be things like flatback echoes or a build-up of reverberation, which can affect speech intelligibility, for example. And then there's comfort, and then there's additional noise from things like ventilation systems. So a lot of these spaces are mechanically ventilated and they're done with fans, and fans make noise. And so there's noise control for that. And then the vibration that they also introduce into the structure, which needs to be isolated. So it's a pretty nerdy job, but I really like it. And I think my favorite part of it is doing a lot of the commissioning testing at the end and kind of walking through a space that's unoccupied and getting to experience how it all sounds and feels when you're walking through it. So I got into that. I was big into audio engineering, but I'm just not sure that my personality at that time was really enjoying the work too much. I loved recording in the studios, but it was, I always preferred working with the underdogs of the scene. So I'd usually be doing a lot of projects for way less than what I probably should have been charging, overworking, just because I loved doing it. It didn't feel like work. And then I didn't really enjoy the live sound as much, just because I didn't really appreciate being around drunk people and, the egos and stuff that can bring out in those party environments, and pretty antisocial hours and all that stuff. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it and still do. And I was at a little bit of a crossroads, and I thought, what am I going to do here? Do I build a studio? Do I go work for somebody else? What do I do? And one of the biggest challenges that I found, especially between hiring different spaces to work in, was that I would have to get accustomed to the acoustics of different listening rooms and different tracking rooms. And so, again, self-indulgent, I just kind of wanted to learn more about that. That seemed to be my shortcoming as an engineer, an audio engineer. And I learned about a university one state over or one province over, depending on the terminology of your country. And I decided to do what's called a graduate diploma. So it's effectively it's like an express 4-core unit course. And that opened up the opportunity for me to continue my master's if I enjoyed it. And I did. And I actually got really involved with psychoacoustical research, so our perception of audio. And if the themes on the record weren't evidenced enough, I like the cerebral. So that was another wormhole that I went down, and did some fantastic research with the perceived elevation of auditory events and how to manipulate our perception of elevation depending on what's called the auditory width. So how thin or how wide a sound event is. It was like, do I do a PhD or do I go earn some money? And then I was in another crossroads, and I was pretty broke. So I decided it was time to earn some money. So I've been consulting for 8 years now. So it's a cool job.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Do you find that there's like any crossover between obviously you have a background in a lot of different things, but do you find that similar people, like-minded people in spaces, maybe even people who are into extreme music that you're into in this particular career choice?
It's interesting because in acoustics, there's a couple of different pathways into it. The most common is actually through engineering, mechanical engineering. And there's left-brained individuals and there's right-brained individuals, and usually the creative types are quite different to the mathletes. So I definitely work with a lot of people that are a little, I guess, more even across the lobes, if you will, or what would you call that? The brain hemispheres. But usually, it's a spectrum thing. I mean, everybody's more anchored to one side, I guess. But usually the musicians are more the airy, descriptive, dreamer types, whereas in the engineering consulting world, it's much more systematic, protocol, numbers. So it's been interesting to me, especially with my communication. I've definitely found that with a lot of technical report writing, it's been very helpful for the conduct that we have behind the scenes with just discussing business and just being very clear about expectations with different people that we're collaborating with, whether that's an engineer, whether it's a designer, a booking agent, whatever. So those other hard skills that come with consulting have been very valuable, I think. But I'm definitely the weirdo in the office. I mean, our sculpture arrived at work, and they all they all got a peek. Yeah,
that's pretty fun. I'm assuming this is what brought you to Vancouver as well.
No, that was a Boeing 737, I think.
Oh,
sorry. Terrible joke.
Hey,
terrible
I
joke.
went right into it. Perfect. Bada bing.
No, that was totally different. I wasn't actually sure I wanted to do acoustics at that time. I won't dwell on it too much, but it was a very difficult year for me. Lots of heartbreak, and I just needed a little bit of an escape and a spiritual journey just to re-find myself and just kind of flow with the tide rather than trying to force my way into something, anything, and just be a little more perceptive to the universe. So I sold everything that I owned. I bought a one-way ticket to Toronto and had no idea that I would end up in Vancouver. And after living quite nomadically for a few months between Toronto and Montreal, I started running out of savings, as you do when you don't work. And things, on the work front over there weren't really tessellating with what I needed at that point. And so I thought that I'd fly home. But before I did that, I wanted to go over to the West Coast, see some friends in Seattle and Portland. And during a stopover in Vancouver, I linked up with my current company. That's been a pretty consistent part of my life. And shortly after that, I met Luca and played guitar again for the first time in some years. And then Atræ Bilis, the foundation of Atræ Bilis was kind of formed. So
that's so cool.
Yeah,
you just never know what is going to happen, where you're going to find yourself. That's all awesome.
Yeah, it's an interesting place to live. It's very different to Melbourne. I don't think any place is perfect, but it's definitely a strange place. It's a very David Lynchian universe over here in the Pacific Northwest, I'd say.
I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I know you do have some upcoming shows. You're going to be hitting up the East Coast soon with Cognitive and Dysentery.
Hell yeah. Yeah. And I think it's less than a month now, actually. Yeah. So weeks away now. That should be really cool. Yeah, very, very excited for that. We just received an email. Cognitive asked us to jump on that. So we feel very humbled for that opportunity. So yeah, flights are booked. We'll be heading over there, sharing a band with Dysentery. So we'll be getting to know the Dysentery lads pretty well, which we're excited for. Should be a couple of weeks. Yeah, it's going to be super cool. And we do a festival between here and Alberta ish called Armstrong Metal Fest. Just a week or so before that, and I think that's the closest thing that we have to a home show here. And that'll be with Decrepit Birth are playing that, so it's yeah, they're going to be great to see. Archaic are playing as well, so yeah, some heavy hitters for sure.
Any places that it seemed obviously with the past few years it's been kind of hard for you to get out there, maybe kind of pick up get the ball rolling on that, maybe more so last year to properly, go out on the road. Is there any place that you haven't been to, or is there a place that you're particularly excited about?
I'm really excited to get over to Massachusetts on this trip, just because there's a few people that have been just really big supporters from day one with this band that we've been in touch with, that we're really excited to meet. And I've also got quite a few just like personal friends that I've been friends with for a long time, but either haven't seen for a long time or haven't met ever. So super excited for Mass. I'm super excited for Baltimore. I'll get to meet my friend Buke for the first time ever. We met doing a podcast. So that's going to be great. And yeah, I think, the whole East Coast is just such a different place to the West Coast. There's so much more pace. I do feel that although people are a lot more blunt, they're a lot more, I don't want to say genuine, but there's just less patience for bullshit over there, which I personally love. So I'm just really excited to just be in the soup of it. And I'm just looking forward to getting bullied by strangers and stuff.
You heard it here first. Bully David on tour.
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm just super psyched to be out on the East Coast. And it's going to be nice weather. It's not going to be frigid and cold and stuff. It can be pretty brutal up in the Northeast and stuff during the cool months. So it's going to be high vibes all around. So yeah, I'd say our show in Mass is probably what I'm most looking forward to. And I guess other places, yeah, I don't know. I think it'd be great to take the guys home to Australia and just share that part of my life. And Japan is great. I've been there as a tourist, but I've never played there as a professional musician. So, and I think most of these reasons is just to kind of share these memories with the rest of the guys, because, I've experienced these places and they're just so rad. I just kind of want to give them a slice of that as well. So, yeah.
Do we want to close this off maybe with some recommendations, maybe some things you've been checking out and listening to?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to have to check my Spotify on my phone here, actually, for what I've been jamming recently. I listened to quite a melange of things. I actually had a big, long drive back from Regina and Saskatchewan over the weekend, so it's kind of all over the place at the moment.
Do you want to start, Dylan?
Sure.
What you been listening to, bud?
First off, I've been listening to the most recent release from the Black Dahlia Murder, off the Servitude album, Aftermath, the first release post Trevor Sternad's passing, RIP. But luckily, we've got Brian Eschbach taking over vocal duties. He's been there since day one. I got to see him on tour for the last leg of the Verminous cycle, and he's doing a fantastic job. This single it sounds like Black Dahlia Murder. It's what we've all expected. It's fucking great. Anybody that thinks the band was going to take a dive is going to be proven wrong. I do want to say that I've also been listening to a buddy's project. It's a Bandcamp only thing. He typically will put out stuff just kind of intermittently every couple years or so. He'll sit down, write kind of 30 minutes of music and put it out for free. He's creative. He does all this stuff with like a loop station, sets up his amps and his drums and mics in a room and just goes for it. He just released a track called Pon Pon, and it's 30 minutes long, but it's not a 30-minute track. It's like multiple tracks just crammed into one. So it's an experience. It's a lot of fun to see my buddies be that creative and do something they're very passionate about.
Hell yeah. Check it out. I only got a couple. New Nail single. First one in like 8 years. It's been forever since I heard from this band. Just announced a new full-length Every Bridge Burning set for release August 30th through Nuclear Blast Records. It's a whopping 82 seconds in length. It's quick. It's abrasive. It's a lot of fun. They got some new members in the band, members of Apparition, Warbringer, Althar. They also have a tour coming up this September, 200 Stab Wounds, who also have an album out or due through Metal Blade Records very, very soon. Mammoth Grinder, who are also great, going to be playing some of their first shows in a while, and Tribal Gaze, who I love. Check that out. Then there's a non-heavy single that I really enjoyed, Killdozer by Midwife. This is a project by solo artist Madeline Johnson. It's very hypnotic and like lo-fi, very guitar-driven type of music, but I love it. It's going to be coming off of an album titled No Depression in Heaven, September 6th through the Flenser. They've been known to release some kind of like interesting stuff like Agriculture, Chat Pile, maybe some releases from King Woman. So I loved it. Check it out. David, what you been checking out, bud?
Cool. Okay, so I'm still digesting this record. It just came out last Friday, but it's the new Malignancy album.
Oh.
Yeah. Jacob from Defeated Sanity is playing bass on this. And they're all monster players, but it's really nice to hear Jacob play with this band. He's a monster. I mean, Ron's guitar riffs just quite literally from another planet as well. Incredible band, and this is just a huge step up, not just in songwriting and technicality, but also production. So, like all very intense death metal records, it takes quite a while to chew on and really savor everything that's going on. So that is in rotation. And then I guess another album that I've been revisiting lately it's an older record from a band called Mouth of the Architect, a record called The Ties That Bind. And this is kind of like a post-sludge record. I don't listen to a whole heap of this style of music, but the bands that do it well do it really well. We played Northwest Terror Fest about a month ago, and Giant Squid had come back. Primitive Man were playing, and I just thought, man, Mouth of the Architect at this gig would have been absolutely perfect if it were possible. So very cool, if you like bands like Neurosis and Isis, the Pelican with like vocals or something, I'm sure you'd enjoy that. It's a longer record. It's moody, really good for night drives. And yeah, I guess they're my two contributions to the What's Spinning. And
of course, one more, Aumicide. It is out now. It's killer. Turn it on. Sit with the whole record. You won't be disappointed. It's out now on $20 spin. Don't be a chump. Pick up a copy. Go see Atræ Bilis on tour. Follow Fulci Rots. David, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, man.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. Super easy to chat with. It was a breeze. Really enjoyed every second of it. Wish you all the best with everything here on the pod, and shouting out the bands that you do is much appreciated, and it also kind of keeps me in the loop with things that are worth checking out, because you clearly know what's up. So thanks for being a voice to the underground and doing what you do.
Thanks for the kind words. Well,
appreciate it, man.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Riff Worship. You can follow us at Riff Worship Pop, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. There's playlists. Back next Wednesday with something else. But for David, for myself, for Dylan, we'll see you next time. Bye.